2.
I'm Spencer.
And I'm Lorraine.
And we're the Itch.
Scratch yourself, motherfucker.
We're here for something a little different than usual.
Yes.
We're going to talk about multiplayer.
And our opinions.
Multiplayer throughout the ages.
And if this episode goes correct, we'll still be friends after this. No, this one isn't so serious. When we get into RPGs, I think.
It's going to be. It's
we might
gonna
push
be
some
a,
boundaries.
A real brouhaha. Real melee.
But until then, or a brawl of some
Yeah.
sorts, or Smash Bros.
It'll be some kind of Smash Bros.
or 4, yeah.
But we want to get into where multiplayer was first,
And where it is today.
where it is today,
And you.
and maybe where it's going.
Yeah. Oh God.
Oof.
There is a where it's going that I have an opinion on. But
All right.
let's get started.
Well, let's start out at gaming from the multiplayer standpoint. Really starts at the beginning.
What's that you say?
Gaming and the very, very original idea of it was multiplayer, believe it or not.
Mm-hmm.
It started with a little game called Pong.
Pong.
Pong was two different rectangles, I guess, knocking around a square as it went back and forth. They even added sound effects to it.
A ball of sorts.
Yeah, and that was the first game actually published by Atari.
Download the soundtrack. It was sick.
Boop, boop, boop. And there was even actual sound effects.
Wasn't it a boop, boop?
Was it?
Yeah.
Oh, you're right,
The
you're right.
walls too. Yeah.
Yeah, each one.
I don't know what the fuck wall they had. If they're playing like ping pong in an alley, but okay.
That's where I always play my ping pong. But yeah, so that started out as that was the first game, and it was multiplayer.
Yeah.
It was actually designed by people. I think they were working in some kind of military thing, and they just wanted to use some of their technology to actually entertain themselves while they were working. So they made that, and lo and behold, Atari liked it, published it, and the video games were born.
A week later, Gears of War came out.
Right. Yeah.
Really pushed the envelope.
So there was that, and then a couple of years after that, another game came out, not actually as a video game, but I don't know if you know what that game is. It's very popular today. It's called Dungeons and Dragons. And technically it's not a video game, but it is the precursor to pretty much every RPG that we have to this day. And, of course, that was also multiplayer.
Aw, shit, son.
So if you look at games from the very, very beginning, multiplayer was kind of the core concept.
Playing with friends. Having fun together.
Mm-hmm. So then it kind of expands into, we go through the ages. There's Atari doing its thing. We already kind of discussed the crash that happened.
Eesh.
And then arcades became the big deal.
Yeah.
Arcades and multiplayer, that goes together like bread and butter.
Yeah, it used to be kind of weird. Multiplayer was a little bit different. Competitive multiplayer even then was a little different. Where if you're playing Pac-Man 2 players, one guy's turn until he dies, and then it's the next guy's turn, or something to that level. Asteroids and stuff like that. It was literally my turn, your turn kind of thing. It wasn't, simultaneous. All right, hey, we're both going to do this. Whoever gets the highest score wins. And that's kind of interesting. It's not really something that you see too much nowadays.
No, not at all. I think if we saw that nowadays, people would be outraged.
The closest we have to it is our, Let's Play Phoenix Wright, which you can get eventually.
But yeah, absolutely. Games were generally played. One person goes until they dies. Next person goes, they die. Back and forth. Let's see who can get the top score.
Exactly.
And then you end up, and that in and of itself is a form of multiplayer because the arcade would be basically a tome of top scores.
Of course.
And you put your initials in, which were always like poop or.
And that was like the whole poop.
You never put that as your top score?
No, my mom wouldn't let me.
Oh.
She fucked me up.
But yeah, you'd have a bunch of top scores.
Ass or.
And that became kind of the competition part. I think that's kind of how competition really started with video games. I mean, if you really want to get into facts and stuff. I think when people look at the actual data of competition, those leaderboards on those games were kind of it.
Yeah, and the leaderboards now echo the same past.
Isn't that ironic?
Yeah, it's weird.
How funny is that?
Yeah, it's like if you look up a leaderboard for fucking, Destiny, or a leaderboard for like Street Fighter or something like that, they have you ranked you know, all right, this is the number one player of this character. Or this is the number one player in general, and then here's how you stack up to that. It's a way of testing yourself and being like, oh, so I am quote unquote this good or whatever.
But there were games that actually had two inputs. There was Joust. I don't know if you recall Joust.
I never played it. I remember it.
It's two jousters just running into each other, trying to kill each other with their spears.
Jousting the fuck out of each other.
So again, a legendary game, and it started that kind of push. Then we get into games like Mario. The Mario originally was that the two different characters kind of jumping through these tube areas, trying to jump on each other and kill each other. So you get that. That kind of started the Mario until eventually they would release the single player that kind of erased that idea. Except they also had the multiplayer where it was one and then the other.
Yeah.
So
Two
that's
player turn. 2 player start.
Does anyone remember two player?
What the fuck's a 2 player?
Just watching your friend just like grinding your teeth like, come on,
You're doing that wrong.
fall into that pit.
You're doing that wrong.
You're going to die and I want you to die. You just wanted each other to die.
Did you just really do that right now? This motherfucker.
Right. But something else came out in the arcades later on that kind of became a big deal. And that was something you're very familiar with,
Street Fighter 2.
just fighting games.
Yeah. Well, Street Fighter wasn't as well received as Street Fighter 2 was. Street Fighter, everyone was just like, whatever. Because it was akin to Kung Fu. I think it was called Kung Fu. It was just before it became the just, you know, go up the floor, go left, go up the floor, go right. It was one guy in a white gi, one guy in a red gi. All right, let's fight. I'm sure there were frames involved and all that.
And that was on the NES, wasn't it?
I'm not sure. Yeah, probably.
I think so.
Right. It was bullshit. Street Fighter came out, and it was just semi-bullshit. And then Street Fighter 2 came out, and that was the first fighting game I ever played. And the majority of people, it was the first fighting game they ever played. It was about just... It was weird, because I didn't know how to do... Anyone's first character was probably... If it wasn't Blanca, it was Alejandro, or it was Chun-Li. Because you didn't have to worry about the inputs. You just press buttons a bunch of times, you're doing a special move. And that's kind of what people wanted, you know. The tournament scene was there, but it was so fucking tiny, it wasn't even,
Right.
you know, like, it's probably like 10 guys nationwide.
Well, and games in general at the time were pretty obscure.
Yeah, they're very much obscure. Not like today, where it's like, you're cool if you play video games. But then... It was this kind of thing where people were still discovering it. No one knew how to do like super moves. The combos, little known fact, well, not little anymore, but little fact, the combos in Street Fighter were the product of glitches. You were
Really?
never originally able to do like consecutive hits without the person moving. And it was about to be patched out until Capcom decided, you know what, let's keep this in and see if we can do something with it. What in turn happens is you're getting 4 or 5 hit combos, adding another level of complexity to the game. So it was a good move in hindsight. It was a very good move to keep that stuff in, because they just wanted it to be like single hits and stuff like that. That's why there'd be times if you play Street Fighter and you hit somebody with like a counter hit or whatever, and then it would slow down and then it would speed back up or whatever the case is, because that was supposed to be the highlight right there. It's fucking sucky. You know, the only combos you were supposed to be able to do were from the special moves. So like the Hurricane Kick, for instance, or
Kind of like Smash Bros. Is today.
Yeah, you know, there wasn't fucking wave or like Melee. There was no wave dashing. There was no L canceling supposed to happen. It just kind of happened. But anyway,
Well, and I think that's interesting that the arcade scene kind of took on that multiplayer. Like every game pretty much had multiplayer at that point. There was Gauntlet.
oh god,
If you're familiar with Gauntlet, well, obviously everyone should probably be familiar. But Gauntlet had you playing. You could play with your friends on
Gauntlet was a fucking gauntlet.
the arcade and just going through and being cooperative. But I think what's interesting is that D&D's path. Can we kind of go into the D&D we mentioned as well? When D&D, when people wanted to make a D&D game, what's interesting to me is that it didn't actually spread out, probably because they take too long for an arcade game.
Yeah, definitely.
And when games started coming out like Dragon Quest and Phantasy Star and Final Fantasy kind of being those real big forerunners to it, Phantasy Star and Dragon Quest in particular, when they came out, those two games didn't actually have multiplayer. That was actually the big deal, is they were actually completely single player.
Yeah, you play by yourself. I mean,
Which I find ironic because D&D was so fun to play with your friends.
Yeah.
But then again, they were huge successes. Like Phantasy Star and Dragon Quest were great at the time, especially.
A lot of it employed the use of your imagination. If you remember the
Right.
setup for the original Phantasy Star, you don't even see your characters, or you see the back of their heads tops from like the waist up or the shoulders up. You don't really see too much past that. And then you're like, oh, well, let me do this. I imagine them standing in this position, or this, that, and the other. A lot of it was really just you had to imagine what was happening.
And I think that almost worked. Maybe it not almost, maybe it completely worked to its credit, because when you were playing with your friends, you kind of all had to chip in your imagination as to what was going on, and
To an
it
idea.
kind of became an amalgamation of different ideas that maybe you didn't think were the best. But when you're playing Dragon Quest or you're playing Phantasy Star, and maybe even Final Fantasy later on, you don't really have anybody else telling you what's going on, and the game itself barely tells you what's going on.
Yeah.
So you're kind of, the story is yours to kind of mold, and I think that's where the disconnect kind of happened. And for a long time, RPGs kind of became a single player game.
Yeah, and to the games or to the genre's credit, it was the first visual based medium that allowed imagination. You could watch a movie and imagine stuff, but at the end of the day, what happens happens.
Right.
Meanwhile, you're playing a game where you feel a little bit more in control because you're in control of the character's actions and all that stuff. You could pretend something in there. You could. I remember for the longest, I used to pretend like I was like, if it was a game that had nothing to do with saving like a damsel in distress, I would always want to save a damsel in distress.
Yeah.
And I'd be like playing like I played Final Fantasy 4 and 5 with 4, 5, and some of 6 with my brother because it was 2 players when they re-released it. I think initially it was 2 players, maybe. But I used to be like, oh, we're saving a princess, you know? And that's the thing. Like it allows you to kind of take on and personalize a little bit of your story. And that's kind of what you see nowadays. Like if you look at like Dragon Age, for instance, that's why you can quote unquote romance, you know, certain people in your party.
Right.
And you can choose your own words that you say to create your own canon of the story.
So single player, as far as RPGs in the NES era, kind of took over for the RPG part of it.
I think
And
so.
Zelda was single player, of course, and Zelda
Yeah.
2. So we kind of saw it shift in a way that I almost want to say this, and don't bash me for it. But I think the way that I kind of see it is casual games at the time of whatever you could consider a casual game would be multiplayer, like your racing games.
Your Mario Karts.
We'll get into that in a little bit in the Super Nintendo era, but yeah, like your little racing games, like whatever racing game would be on the NES, nobody even knows because they're also generic. The fighting game that was on the NES was like a kung fu game where it was literally like 2 buttons.
Well, I mean, Mortal Kombat came out eventually.
Did it come out on the NES though? The NES?
No, SNES.
SNES. Yeah, at the time the arcade had some fighting games. So the arcade was really where multiplayer was hot.
And it wasn't even cooperative so much as it was competitive more than anything.
Right.
Cooperative games eventually did come along, but
Right, because next you got into the Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis
yep, that's
type of era.
Your era of Sonic,
Yeah.
your Gunstar Heroes. Oh God, I have that game. Shit like that.
Now RPGs were still, as we were saying, RPGs were still pretty much single player. There
Yeah.
were a couple.
Yeah, I want to say that's when they started to like change from being so single player oriented, and a lot of games actually went from. It was weird. It was like games were really single player on NES, your Ataris, your Odysseys, and all that stuff, and then you go 2 players, and a lot of games, like if anyone's ever played Kadash, I love that game, is RPG, but it's like side scroller at the same time. Bunch of other games that were coming out during the Sega Genesis SNES era that were 2 players specifically. There were your competitive games, but it's mainly about working together. I felt a lot
Well,
of
it's
your games.
like a game we were talking about, Secret of Mana.
Yeah, Secret of Mana, which we will play, was very much a cooperative like experience for people just to run through together, and it's a great game. And a lot of games during that era just seemed to focus more on being like cooperative. I feel like that's all I remember about that generation. Yeah, there were your Street Fighters. There was Mortal Kombat. There was I think Killer Instinct.
That's where the fighting genre was hot.
It was king, pretty much.
You got Mortal Kombat. You had Street Fighter 2, which was just tearing the world apart.
Yeah, whichever iteration you want to go with.
Street Fighter 2 Alpha, I thought, was like the big one.
Well, that's Sega, Saturn, and PlayStation.
Oh, is that the next generation?
That's
okay.
further down, yeah.
What is there? There's Killer Instinct. You're right.
There's Killer Instinct,
On
Mortal
Super
Kombat, Street Fighter. There's Mortal Kombat 2. And then there was Street Fighter Championship Edition, Street Fighter 2, Street Fighter 2 Championship Edition, Turbo, Street Fighter, Hyper. Was it Hyper? I don't know. I forget. Super Street Fighter 2, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. There's a shit ton. There's a lot.
And if you want to get into it too, like you mentioned, Mario Kart was huge.
Mario Kart was
I love that on Super Nintendo.
That's when it first started being like a big fucking deal that you're playing these racing games with your friends. And
and Bomberman.
I didn't play too much Bomberman.
I
thought it was more a
loved-
PC thing, wasn't it? Bomberman.
They had it for Super Nintendo. In fact, for the Super Nintendo, I had a multi-tap, which was incredibly rare,
That
where you
is
could
a
actually
big deal.
put 4 players playing one game, and you could play 4-player Bomberman on a Super Nintendo,
Damn.
and it was fantastic. I love Bomberman. I think they made a new one semi-recently, like maybe 5 or 10 years ago or something like that, and it was just horrible.
It's definitely not that reason.
It was like 3D or something. And
There was
like,
one like 3 years ago. Yeah.
Oh, was it? And it was like the 3D one where they looked all cool, quote unquote.
Yeah. Kind of like how Sonic's going right now.
Yeah.
They look cool.
But the
Not-
original like Bombermans were just a blast to play. Sports games were starting to pick up, get a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, Tecmo Bowl.
That is my favorite sports game to this day. I still enjoy that game.
Tecmo Bowl was the tits.
I love Tecmo Bowl.
And yeah, there wasn't really.
The hockey game, there's a hockey game released at that time that's considered the best hockey
You
game
know,
ever
how
made.
can we forget?
Was it Wayne Gretzky's?
No, NBA Jam.
NBA
How
Jam.
can you forget about NBA Jam?
You big head mode.
Cooperative or competitive, but you could go either way.
Right, and that started introducing cooperative and competitive. I think some of the arcades probably had a little bit of that, but you could definitely start mixing it up with all that kind
You
of
have
stuff.
you have Final Fight. You had Streets of Rage. Oh God, Streets of Rage 2, which I have. Streets of Rage 2, fucking Mutant League Football. How can you forget?
Yeah. Sega Mega Drive.
The Sega Mega.
So there's that
60
stuff.
Whiners.
I'm not sure when it came out, but there was a little
93.
game. There's a couple other interesting games like Ultima
Ultima
Online.
wasn't online.
When did that game start?
Deucer. Can you check that out first?
Because I know that was like one of the first. And actually, one of the consoles, I can't remember what it was. It might have been the Sega Genesis. One of the Sega consoles actually had online functionality.
Definitely not the Sega.
Yeah, it
or
was-
not. It was the Sega Saturn.
Was it the Sega Saturn?
It's the closest thing I could think of to have.
One of them actually introduced it in where you could actually download games via your telephone wire. Believe it or not.
3 years later, you finally picked up a game.
But
Yeah, it definitely wasn't like the Mega Drive. If anything, the closest thing I could think of it being would be the Sega Saturn or the Dreamcast.
the Dreamcast had it for sure, but it actually happened earlier than that. So that kind of ends at 16-bit era. And then we get to the 32-bit era, and you got the PlayStation.
Well, no, not. I mean, there was the 32X. That's the 32-bit era.
Yeah, but Sega's dead.
The Sega CD, Sonic CD.
Oh,
The
nobody
only
likes-
the only good game.
Really?
The best Sonic game was no. Actually, I argue that. I don't know. Were you Sonic kid? Sonic and Knuckles 3.
With the combination?
Yeah, with the 32X. You had to have,
Yeah.
you had to work with the 32X to get Sonic and Knuckles 3 or Sonic 3 and Knuckles, however you want to say it.
That was a lot of fun.
That was the shit. I remember my brother used to spend hours trying to get all the Chaos Emeralds, doing that stupid, the 3D little thing where you have to collect all the balls. You know, whoop, 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 whoop. That shit drove me up the fucking wall. But
Yeah.
we needed to be hypersonic. Not even supersonic. We needed hypersonic. That was a fucking big deal then. He got that, and he got fucking Super Knuckles. that shit was sick because you didn't even know those motherfuckers could do it. Yet here they are, and then the music comes on. It's like, you know, went crazy intense. It's such a good game, and I love playing it with him because the first Sonic 3 was like really, really cooperative, like heavy, like in the sense you could abuse it. Hey, Tails, hit that guy. I'll stay back here and stay alive and keep my rings, you know? Or if Sonic gets hit, shit, better go collect his rings for him, you know? That kind of shit. Like, it was, and I was obviously Tails because my brother's an asshole. But, like, fighting the last boss, just going through the same game again, it felt empty to me as a kid when Sonic 3 ended. I was like, this is some bullshit. And then suddenly you get tossed into the jungle zone. It's like, and I was like, the things that you bounce on, they're like, whop, go whop. You know? That shit was sick.
Well, getting back to like multiplayer though, more broad multiplayer, the PlayStation also had a multi-tap that you could use. I don't know if you ever got that.
I did get the multi-tap.
That one had a more
Mad Cats, and it was fucking
Yes.
bullshit because it
Mad
broke
Catz.
all the fucking time. We'd be playing like whatever wrestling game was out then. Every
Well,
5
see, they
seconds,
had-
disconnect.
They had Warzone, Attitude. I think those are. Oh, and then SmackDown.
I think I played SmackDown.
Those are the ones that kind of came out in that area. But those were actually a lot of fun.
Yeah, and then there was also the ones on the N64 as well,
Yeah, which
and which didn't require multi.
No Mercy is probably considered the best game of all, well, the best wrestling game of all time by some, especially me.
I don't really play that many,
Yeah, I know.
so I can't tell.
But anyway, when Sony came out, they actually had a good selection of fighting games as well. Tekken 3 would be considered probably,
Tekken 1, 2, and 3 were all on.
but I think Tekken 3 was like probably one of the best fighting games for that console. I would think.
It was the best selling, but it wasn't it wasn't. You can argue it. There's the casual market, and then there's the competitive market on which Tekken was the best or which competitive fighting game was the best.
Then there's Virtua Fighter. Was that PlayStation or Sega?
That was Sega. So I was on Sega Saturn.
Sega Saturn.
That was the first 3D fighting game I ever played. Man, could you jump in that game? You could.
There's Dead or Alive.
Dead or Alive, yeah, which was so weird.
Isn't it super blocky?
It was blocky, and their boobs moved like crazy, and it was just like, like it had to do with like, if you put on bouncing boobs, like they're smacking their own faces with their shit, and I'm just like, okay. And there was what else was there? Fighting game wise, there was Tekken 1, 2, and 3, Dead or Alive 1. Technically, I think Street Fighter Alpha 2 came out on the PlayStation. And Street Fighter Alpha 3, that ties back into what we're talking about the multiplayer aspect, because they had dramatic battles. Now, Street Fighter Alpha, the first one, had the same thing where you fight 2 guys against 1 guy. You fight 2 guys against Bison, Ken and Ryu only against Bison, but it was a cheat code that you had to put in every time you wanted to fight him. It's bullshit. And then 2 didn't have anything. Oh, excuse me, Bloody Roar. I forgot.
That's when you turn to animals, right?
Bloody Roar was the tits. And then there was Street Fighter Alpha 3 had it to where you could choose any character, teamed up and do like a little small mission, a fight or 2 or something like that. And then you could choose like preset teams, like guys that go well together, like Ken Ryu, Julie Junie, and then have them fight.
Xbox and GameCube.
Yeah.
So what's some of the highlights here?
One of the biggest highlights was Soul Calibur 2. Pick your poison. Most people went GameCube.
Because of Link. And Xbox had Spawn.
Xbox had Spawn. PlayStation had Heihachi.
Yes.
I think that they had something to do with, competitively speaking, there was different timing on them.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Tekken 4 and I believe 5 was PlayStation 2, wasn't it?
And now that you're mentioning this, when did fighting games really become like
A big deal?
competitive?
I would say.
Because I don't want to count arcades because that's different.
When did they become competitive?
Yeah,
Marvel vs. Capcom 2.
so that's Dreamcast.
It was on Dreamcast, but it didn't hit its stride until PlayStation
Okay.
2. I would say it was then, because you had like X-Men: Children of the Atom and all that stuff, and Marvel vs. Capcom 1, Marvel Super Heroes vs. Street Fighter, all those things on PlayStation, and then on PlayStation 2, you get Dead or Alive 2 Hardcore, Dead or Alive 3 Xbox exclusive, You get Mark of the Wolves was on Dreamcast as well, which was a great fighting game. It was like Fatal Fury.
Oh, okay.
And stuff like that. It's like a time skip and everything like that. He had Street Fighter Third Strike, which eventually made its way onto. That's when the hardcore audience was established, and all fighting games started with a hardcore audience before they had a casual audience. So if anyone remembers the infamous Evo Moment 34, can you YouTube that for me? It was a match between. It's the first time fighting games hit mainstream media. It was between Justin Wong and Daigo Umehara, which are like they're cool with each other. But it was like finals at Evo. It was a close match, and Daigo is playing as Ken, he's Japanese player, and then Justin Wong is playing as Chun Li, and Justin Wong has life lead, and can chip out. You know what chipping is, right?
No.
Like he takes block damage, so as long as he hits him with a special attack, he's going to kill him. And in that game, it was attributed to a hardcore audience. If you press forward on the active frames of an attack, like when an attack can hit you, you parry, and then at that point you recover faster. They don't recover fast enough, and you can follow it up with an attack. Or if it's a multi-hit attack, you keep parrying. You can
What
keep
year
parrying.
was that?
Huh?
What year was that?
I'm not sure. Like
You said Evo something?
Evo Moment 34. I don't think there's a 33 other moments. I think they just gave it a random number. But it was definitely the most popular moment in fighting game history, and that kind of brought competitive fighting games to the mainstream and stuff like that. It's the same thing. Super Smash Brothers, the Wombo combo. If you ever heard of that, you have.
Yeah, I've heard the Wombo combo. They use it in LoL all the time.
Where do you think it came from? The Wombo combo, and there was something else. Can you pull it up, or it was? It's a pretty big deal, and I would have to say was the best time, or was the most important time. If it wasn't, yeah, right there. So they're fighting right. You can fast forward to more than halfway.
So this is the big one, the final round.
Yeah, and this is on a projector too. Keep in mind, there's no like big screen TV or anything like that. This is just straight projector, one room, a bunch of sweaty guys that unfortunately don't know about hygiene. You know, and everyone's getting hyped up. It's a lot of people.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, you know, Street Fighter, you know, Chun Li and Ken are, and Daigo is like literally losing, and I think Justin Wong's on match point, so he's about to win, and he's literally he's hit confirming, which means like he knows it's gonna hit, so he does the input for the special to follow up all the time. So he's doing really good, and he's kicking the shit out of Daigo. But that, I would say, is the most. This right here is the most important moment in video game or in fighting video game history, because it's very much a staple between anyone. Like you can ask anyone what was Evo Moment 34, and they're like, oh, it was freaking Justin Wong versus Daigo. See, because he's buffering, he's getting ready to do a super, and then yeah.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. And everyone got crazy. And there's actually a video that shows Daigo and Justin sitting down when this is happening. And Justin's literally mashing, because that's a game where you can mash to get more hits out of. He's literally mashing to do like more hits. And he's like, come on, don't. You know, he's trying to mess up his timing, too. Daigo's timing. And ironically enough, they re-released Street Fighter Third Strike and called it Online Edition. And they have that as a challenge, and it's actually really hard to do. They let you do the Evo Moment 34.
Wow.
It's hard as shit.
So, and when was this game out? That was in the PS2 era, right?
Yeah, it's PS2 era.
And that's when fighting games really
Took off
and having their own. And then again, it has probably more to do with video games kind of swooping into the mainstream a little bit more.
Yeah, I would say that. There were other games too that came out on PlayStation 2 that were really like even RPGs that were really like two-playerish. I want to say, was that Ark the Lad one?
Oh, I don't know.
I think it was like an online RPG or something like that to that effect. But on GameCube, by the way, you did have Phantasy Star Online,
which had online play.
and you could play split screen. So
Yeah.
either way, you're having a ball of a time.
Yeah, this is where RPGs actually. I think people saw from the previous generation of PCs in that time frame. People were starting to catch on that this was something that gamers actually really enjoyed, was multiplayer RPGs. Because this is when you had another little game that came out on the GameCube called Baldur's Gate.
Yeah.
Actually came out on the GameCube.
Was it Baldur's Gate 2 or was it 1?
2 Dark Alliance, I think it was
Yeah.
called. That one, it came out on the GameCube. PS2 alternatively had Champions of Norath, which was fantastic. If anybody wants the opportunity to play it, I don't usually like Sony online games, particularly like EverQuest, because I think they're kind of ugly. But this game, especially for a PS2 game, is gorgeous.
I mean, if you look at it, go back to the one game that kind of started it all, which was Diablo. More specifically, Diablo 2.
Right.
That's
Diablo.
the one that everyone remembers the most as being the most innovative and stuff like that. So many games jumped on the hype train and realized that you can play a RPG, action RPG, with more than one player and have a good time. That's how you get your Baldur's Gates, well, from the first Diablo, I believe. You get your Baldur's Gate, you get your Heroes of Newerth.
Norath.
Norath.
Heroes of Newerth is a MOBA game.
Yeah, fuck
Han.
Fuck that bullshit. But there's a ton of things where a ton of games kind of really capitalized off of that and really took it and ran with it. Even if you look at other games like X-Men Legends or Marvel Ultimate Alliance type stuff, they pulled from Diablo elements from it. There's a bunch of online RPGs that pulled from it too as well. And that's kind of the generation that we were in when online games started to become more like towards the end of.
And who do you give credit for that?
What, online games?
Yeah, for consoles.
For consoles. Phantasy Star.
Which console manufacturer do you give credit for?
More. Okay, Resident Evil had one of the best online. Resident Evil Outbreak was the absolute shit. I love that game. I don't care what reviews it got. I love that game. Xbox had a few games.
Well, that's what I was going to go into.
Was Xbox?
I think the most influential
Was Halo
for
2.
online gaming was Xbox.
It
They
had to be.
created Xbox Live, which everything is now modeled after.
Yeah, no, payment plans and everything like that. But I think GameCube had its own payment plan. It was just expensive.
They had their own weird thing. They did it terribly.
Yeah, and it was
and
for
still
very-
continue to do it terribly.
It was for very few games anyway. It was for Phantasy Star and it was for
I think you could technically play any multiplayer game on it. It was just so convoluted and weird. Like there was just a way you could get it to where you could play. So you could play Smash Bros online. It was just
you had to mod it.
it was basically modding and being bizarre.
Yeah.
So Nintendo was already showing signs that they didn't really know how to handle it. Sony was trying.
They had a couple of games here and there.
Sony actually had the first MMORPG online.
Final Fantasy 11?
No,
What?
they had EverQuest Online Adventures.
Oh. Yeah, and they did have Final Fantasy 11.
They eventually had Final Fantasy 11 as well, which was actually a good game.
Yeah.
Um,
Really slow though. My brother will die by that game.
But I do want to emphasize Xbox's role in this. They were huge. Like if you wanted online in that generation, you were going to Microsoft. You're going to Xbox.
Well, I mean, they had hit and misses. Their biggest hit was obviously Halo.
Halo was both cooperatively a hit and competitively. Halo 2 was huge.
The peak of first-person shooters on consoles, not on PC.
PCs had Counter-Strike,
You got that, but you also have your arena-based, which is
Unreal Tournament.
Unreal Tournament, Quake 3 Arena, your Twitch-based shooting. I would call Counter-Strike Twitch-based, and you did need to jump in Counter-Strike.
The problem with PC gaming, and it's still a problem to this day, is cheating.
Oh, like modding.
Modding and all that kind of stuff.
I would have said something different.
You think so?
I would have said
PC
accessibility sometimes.
Yeah, accessibility.
If you're a person who's trying to get into League of Legends, good luck. Without having a bunch of assholes, people complaining about how you play, even if you're just trying to figure out the ropes.
You were using accessibility in a different way than I was using it.
What do you mean? Like
Because you were
approaches?
using accessibility as in the community.
No, well, not necessarily.
Or people being good?
A lot of instances, it can be about players' performance, accessibility-wise. But the main reason I was talking about was more back then. Computers were really expensive.
There you go. That's what I was going to say.
Every little thing that you're trying to get a graphics card, $300. Drop it. Are you serious?
Yeah.
For something to compete.
The hardware was definitely not there for a lot of people.
It was awful. It was like no family. Every family, I would say, in America, like averages at least one laptop or one computer, one desktop, right? In my household, we have 2 laptops and a desktop. 2 laptops, 2 desktops. And in yours, how many?
I have we have 2 desktops, but one of them is work related. Laptop, one laptop, and then a couple tablets. And then we have our phones, which are essentially computers now.
Yeah, nowadays, just tiny microprocessors.
Yeah.
Well, see, that's the thing. Is now it's a little bit easier to get into it. $700, you're looking at a computer that can compete with a lot of games.
Mm-hmm.
It's not high end, truly high end, but you're playing a lot of games on it.
Right.
You're not running around playing Dragon Age Inquisition, but you're getting by.
At the time, I would say that at that era, Counter-Strike and games like that, like Quake and stuff, they had their following, but it was kind of not mainstream yet. I wouldn't consider it to where it is today, where you have Call of Duty being the biggest game of the year.
I would argue that.
You would?
Just because QuakeCon.
QuakeCon, that's true.
It's-
But I feel like that's kind of that's where that was. I feel like at the same time that's representative of how it was niche. How it was like, because it's not like there's what's bigger, QuakeCon or E3?
Yeah, I know, but I mean, look at the subject matter though. You have a multitude of games, or you have.
And
You have your
those
story.
first-person shooters, those Counter-Strike players might be the most hardcore community I've ever seen.
Probably. They were definitely inaccessible. If you were playing Counter Strike at all, like. Shit. Keep talking.
Anyway, so those players were obsessive. I've seen videos, maybe that's one he was trying to pull up on YouTube, of somebody cheating, and they would literally carry him out and throw him on his ass, then throw his computer out because they thought that he was cheating. Didn't know that he was cheating. They thought that he was cheating. Which he could have been, because everyone kind of did.
Aimbots.
Aimbots, shoot through walls, all that kind of stuff. And that's, to me, what made it so unmainstream, made it so hard for gaming to really grasp it, is that you could go on there and play, but the skill part was kind of in question when people were using all that kind of crap. And Steam helped out with that later.
Yeah. Scary ass.
But on consoles, Xbox was fantastic at this. They had Halo. They eventually had the Rainbow Six series, which which one was it? Ghost was pretty good online, but they had a Rainbow Six. I can't remember what it was.
Was it the. I think I know which one you're talking about.
But that one was huge online. Rainbow
Rainbow
Six was a
Six,
big series at the time. Nowadays, nobody really looks at it as
I mean,
huge.
there were some multiplayer games that were incredibly good that didn't even need a online aspect on the GameCube. Obviously, Super Smash Bros. Melee came out then.
That was huge. That was a big game.
Burnout was definitely on the Xbox. Whatever. I just thought of that just now.
That was Criterion.
Who was it? I just had them.
Burnout was also on GameCube as well.
Rogue Squadron.
Rogue Squadron was gorgeous.
It was an amazing game.
I've heard many arguments that the GameCube was actually the strongest of all the consoles, which is ironic.
I've heard that from a performance standpoint.
Which is really ironic considering it's Nintendo's image today, which is the
Yeah.
complete opposite.
I mean, everyone was in the graphics war until I guess Nintendo just figured, hey, let's forget about graphics for a while.
Yeah.
I remember when the Wii U came out, I was like, finally, they're gonna make a game that allows them to fucking what's it called. And they were, oh shit, I totally forgot. Fucking Mario Kart Double Dash was the first Mario Kart I ever played.
Oh, really? That you ever played?
I wasn't a Nintendo.
I was bred on the Super Nintendo version.
So playing that, I was like, whoa, I could switch characters. I'm like, I could just swap those motherfuckers. It felt amazing.
That was a very good game. It introduces the drifting mechanic, I believe.
Yeah.
That we now use today, where you wiggle it and then you get the bursts.
Yeah, and depending on how your sparks look,
Yeah,
determines your
little dog.
hey, pups.
So yeah, the GameCube was good. I still attribute Xbox as the winner in terms of multiplayer.
I would say, yeah, for accessibility purposes, anybody can plug in Halo. Hey, you suck, you're good, whatever, you're playing Halo. 2.
I still love Halo 2 to this
Halo
day.
1, you had to use some backdoor shit to play online. You couldn't truly play online.
Yeah, I remember system linking Xboxes. That's the only time I've ever personally system
That's how
linked.
you settled disputes when you're a kid. If it wasn't a fighting game, it was let's play Halo.
Yeah.
Like 1v1 me. Let's do it, dog. You know, or 2v2, bro. I could take you and your friend.
So games were really consoles and PC was really starting to embrace online and just multiplayer in general at this
Yeah,
point.
like I said, during that era, there was a lot of competitive fighting games and stuff like that, and that was actually the year that fighting games, or that was the generation fighting games died. Actually,
That might have also been my favorite year of console gaming. It was so good.
it was good for RPGs.
Good for RPG. Well, I would argue PS1 might be the best year for
Yeah, you had
generation
like
for RPGs.
Grandia, you had Star Ocean till the end, or Star Ocean Second Story.
Yeah.
You had Suikoden, Final Fantasy Tactics, my favorite.
But
Beyond the Beyond.
This guy.
2 out of 10. PS2 had
Legends of Dragoon.
that was a good game. Chrono Cross. All of Final Fantasy 7 through 9 were all like
PS2 had Final Fantasy
Perfect games.
X, which is arguably a very good Final Fantasy.
yeah.
Story may not have been like perfect or the voice acting, but they were ambitious at the time. It's like, go
I
back.
thought the PS2 era was not as good in the RPGs. I think they went through some weird experimental phase with that.
They had a lot of random games that they had out.
Final Fantasy 12, I will never appreciate. I know some people think it's great. I cannot stand
I love Final
that
Fantasy
game
12.
because that game seemed like it was trying to be a multiplayer game.
The point of it was to try and make it feel more alive, like the characters had their own movements and stuff. That's what the gambits were for. And
I think it failed. Some people say it was, and I don't think it was a bad game.
it doesn't even have a cult following. It has a legit following.
I don't think it was necessarily a bad game. Like the production values were through the roof.
Yeah.
Like it was.
It looked very nice.
It was a very good looking game.
Yeah.
There was a lot of detail in that game, tons of it. I just thought, like the dungeons for me, the ones that I played, were so boring. Like they had no character to them. They almost seemed like they were randomly generated to me. Is how bad they looked to me. And the combat system, the gambits, I wasn't a huge fan of because it broke the one rule. And we probably shouldn't even go into this too much because it gets into a different topic entirely.
Yeah.
But I did not like the gambit system. I'll just say that. Was the gambit system how you leveled up, or was that how you gave your computer controlled friends moves?
Second one.
Second
Yeah.
one. So I didn't care for that. Did you know that actually uses Final Fantasy VI logic?
Really?
Yeah.
That's neat. Hey, it's got a part of a really good game. I should like it a little more.
But anyway,
Anyway.
that one felt like it was trying to do multiplayer and didn't, which is ironic because Final Fantasy XI had already come out.
Yeah.
And it was already a success.
Yeah.
But whatever. I'm not going to dwell on that too much.
Well, it was more of a success on the PC. The PC and the Xbox 360, when it first came out, had offered that. And then the PlayStation 2 had it, but it wasn't really a success until those consoles were... Whatever. It was just more avenues of approach, essentially. If you didn't have an Xbox 360, you had a PlayStation 2.
But basically, by the end of this console, or that console generation, I should say, everyone kind of knew what was coming. And that's online.
Yeah, and more specifically, first-person shooters.
Oh, God.
That probably created a lot of the generation that you see today. There's a lot of kids played that growing up, going into your Call of Duties, and that's probably why it sells so well.
Yeah.
Because it's a classic. If people kept coming out with Mario Karts, you'd probably still get them. If people came out with RPGs, you'd probably still get them.
Right.
Or if another fighting game came out that looked nice, or was in the same vein as a King of Fighters or Street Fighter, I'd probably get it.
So here's where we have the Xbox 360, the Wii, and the PlayStation
We could
3.
just take the Wii out.
Why?
Because the Wii didn't really, as far as multiplayer online goes,
I think that's very important.
the Wii didn't really have all that much.
And why isn't it? Nintendo does. I don't know if they didn't understand it, or they didn't want it.
The market.
They didn't. They didn't understand the market. They give you what's called friend codes,
Fuck that shit.
and you have to kind of know each other's friend codes to play online. You can't just go on into lobbies. Xbox Live was the perfect model for how to do it right.
Yeah.
I'm just going to throw it out there. I mean, you can not like little pieces of it or whatever. They had the online community, You
Have
jump into a game with
communication.
people, into a lobby, and you play these games with anybody you want.
The biggest problem that PlayStation had during that time, in addition to its price range, was PlayStation 3, right? I said that. In addition to its price range, was the microphone support. People didn't have microphones on PlayStation because they were Bluetooth. Bluetooth usually costs money. You can buy your own first-party mic, but it was pretty expensive. Meanwhile, look at the Xbox 360.
Mm-hmm.
$20 for a mic.
Xbox 360 was molded to play online with Xbox Live. Everything about it.
Yeah, and what essentially followed was the series of RPGs died. I think in that generation,
Completely.
there wasn't a good RPG.
Well,
But-
let me rephrase that. I would rephrase that into Western RPGs were
Dominated.
dominant. Japanese RPGs, nobody made them.
Yeah, to this day, Japanese RPGs are still kind of like more obscure.
Yeah,
Doesn't mean they're bad. There's some still great ones.
absolutely.
Like what was that one? The one you didn't like. It was right calling you out. It's like No Kiri or
Ni no Kuni.
Ni no
Ni no
Kuni.
Kuni, yeah.
I do not like that game.
Oh, both of you guys don't. Well, apparently accolades left and right.
It's gorgeous and beautiful, and it should be really good. I just didn't like it.
But then you have your Western RPGs and Western games. Really, that was literally a Western generation, which is it kind of explains why the Wii did so well at first, and then just kind of like it was literally like the Wii held the NOS button down. They shot out the gates and then just kind of.
But as far as the growth of Western RPGs, I attribute that to a game that had come out the last generation, but on PC.
What?
And it came out in 2004, and it's actually an MMO that took over where EverQuest left off, and it was World of Warcraft.
It's not a Western. Blizzard's Korean.
No, it's very Western. It's a Western RPG.
Activision and Blizzard. I don't know.
Oh,
It's completely Western style,
well, yeah, it has more Western tropes.
right? Which
I
is
feel.
more of a D&D push.
But that's like the same thing. You can't call I Feel. Sleephouse made it. And, well, Square Enix made it. So, then it is. Never mind. Fuck it. Shit, I was going somewhere.
Well, I mean,
Lost it.
an Asian person can make a Western style RPG.
Yeah, but that essentially kind of makes it from a Eastern, Asian, whatever perspective than it does more from a Western perspective.
I don't think so.
I don't think Call of Duty could ever
I
be
th-
a Japanese
I think of
game if a Japanese.
as when I classify a Japanese RPG, I think of generally more turn-based, more visible stats like HP, and I did 200 damage solid. Like that's what I did is 200 damage. Whereas when I look at a Western RPG, I look at more action-based. I look at more dice rolling, like invisible
KOTOR.
stat creation.
which
exactly.
we totally forgot to mention.
Well, but that's not multiplayer, so
Still amazing.
it's amazing, no doubt. That's one of my favorites.
And-
But anyway, it's got a lot of dice rolling. It's got a lot of D&D forced elements.
I'm about to blow you out the water. No offense.
Yeah,
Kingdom Hearts had none of what you're talking about in JRPG, but it is a JRPG.
you're right.
It's I when I look at it.
Well,
I
that's
think
the
more-
lines blurring, though.
It
But
really
it's,
is.
you know, yeah.
But I think more in the sense of the company more than I do the characteristics of. The
I
game.
don't because as more of these games come out, we're shifting to the Western style. So a Japanese company can still produce a Western style game.
Yeah, and I will say a lot of people like what Devil's Third is technically a Western style game produced by a Japanese group. Rumble Roses is technically because the idea of wrestling is Western. It's not Japanese or anything like that. They have their own circuits, but it's like baseball is originally
Yeah.
Western, but they will have a Japanese baseball game. I think-
Blizzard Entertainment was created by 3 UCLA college graduates.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I thought it was
Very
like Blizzard,
American.
like Korea or something. They did like Diablo 3 then, didn't they?
But I mean, regardless,
Regardless,
uh,
BlizzCon's in Korea.
the popularity, the success of World of
BlizzCon's
Warcraft,
in California.
There's a BlizzCon that's in Korea. There's some
Yeah,
sort of
they-
a convention because they're celebrated like so greatly. In
They
Korea.
do them across the world.
Yeah.
It's
But-
not just like Korea and the U.S. It's like Germany
Oh.
and all over the place. They do all sorts of stuff.
well, either way. I mean, but the point is that it's the style, not necessarily the company. And the style is World of Warcraft made it so popular, made the idea of Dungeons and Dragons and that broad like.
I would call it more European than I call it Western, to be honest. How many people were there? A lot of people that have accents in World of Warcraft, for instance.
Yeah, but everybody in America thinks
Yeah,
that intelligent people.
It's
have
either
accents.
it's kind of split down the middle between an American accent and a European accent.
See, because I look at things like we just got done talking about like Mordor,
Mm-hmm.
stuff, or Shadows of Mordor. Every orc has a Cockney accent. Why is that? You know,
I think people consider, even in America, which this is really odd, but we consider that British accent to be more like intellectual. Whenever we see
at least unique.
whenever we consider
Yeah.
leadership, we always put
Well,
them with a British accent.
When you're talking about the orcs and all that kind of stuff, anytime you ever think of castles and moats and catapults and anything like that,
I think like
you think European because it was not here in America.
yeah.
Yeah.
We didn't do that.
I mean, we had accents and stuff like that. Maybe moats if you're weird.
Well, until they make World of Warcraft,
the
World of Warcraft Civil War Edition,
I
we'll
know.
probably keep hearing all those accents.
But yeah, no, I get what you're saying. A lot of like gameplay in general, cooperatively, was really just kind of brought along in World of Warcraft.
Yeah, they couldn't use the Japanese style for online play for a lot of those kinds of games. It just didn't work.
It did work for Final Fantasy XI. A lot of the gameplay of Final Fantasy XI as a whole was pure cooperative. There was no soloing that you can do unless
Right.
you were king shit. You had to party up, and that I wouldn't say that's not in World of Warcraft because you did have a party element to it, but I would say that World of Warcraft didn't rely on as much communication as Final Fantasy XI did. And I know that may sound weird to some people, you know, what the 3 people watching at home, but it really did. Every single move you made, you had to tell people. You had to communicate in some way.
I think what's ironic is Final Fantasy XII. I almost want to give it credit for starting that, where they wanted you to feel like you're in an open world with where everyone else is alive and making decisions.
Mm-hmm.
But I give World of Warcraft credit for putting that idea into the next generation's heads.
Into an online.
And then now all of a sudden, Dragon Age Origins, when you're playing, that whole world is like what Final Fantasy XII was shooting for, where
Yeah.
everybody's got something going on.
I would call that the gameplay better though. I mean, if you think about it, the frame rate doesn't dip below fucking 20 in that game. Holy shit.
And then you have other games that really seem like they should be online.
Mass
Elder
Effect.
Scrolls.
Yeah. And-
Ever anybody play Elder Scrolls Oblivion or Skyrim?
Well, just don't play Elder Scrolls Online.
Yeah, ironically,
It's
the,
fucking
the online part of it was awful. But
But like even Fallout was a big one.
Mhm.
I wish that game was online so bad.
yeah, a lot of these games, the RPGs lend themselves to almost be online.
Yeah.
They're this close to being online.
The
games.
whole point of it is a persistent world.
Mm-hmm.
But keeping within that realm, these games were the true games. Like, okay, so that's a good example. Yeah, we can use World of Warcraft. In World of Warcraft, producer Eric, are you a chosen one of sorts?
I feel like I am a super powerful soldier in a large army.
Okay, so kind of. Okay.
That's how I feel.
Final Fantasy 14, you're essentially a chosen one. You're a warrior of light. You're a dude that helped them before the calamity, and you're helping them after the calamity. In games like Fallout, Skyrim, well, any of the Elder Scrolls really, you feel that same sentiment, but you actually believe it. That's a combination of gameplay with story when they mesh up together properly, as opposed to playing an online RPG. Hey, I'm a warrior of light. Time to kill Ifrit. Oh, I need 7 other guys.
Oh, and I got to start out killing rats.
I got to kill. Yeah, you don't really feel it. It's not conveyed properly. Whereas in Fallout 3 or New Vegas, especially New Vegas, you get your head blown off, sort of. You wake up. Oh shit! I need to kill the motherfucker that tried to kill me. Oh, well, I'm in this village. Oh man, they're being attacked by these bandits. You feel more like you're attached to it, and that's where I figure the sort of death, quote unquote, of the cooperative game. Well, it's not really yes, it is, and I'll get to that. Is okay. Mass Effect 3 had the multiplayer element, but they combined it with the story-driven part of it. Okay, you're fighting a war. You're playing as the guys fighting against the. You're one of the ground troops fighting against these guys. Or in Dragon Age Inquisition, you're part of the Inquisition, but you're a foot soldier out there, with other foot soldiers clearing a dungeon. But the rewards you receive make their way back to your single player game. It works out. And I honestly believe that's actually not a bad way of going about things. And EA is all about that shit.
I'm glad you I was literally just about to mention EA's quote from the last generation, which I thought was a huge deal, is they specifically said, "We will not release a game that doesn't have an online component."
Mirror's Edge.
They,
Oh, fuck me. Speedruns.
mm-hmm.
So it was on there.
Pretty much every game EA has released, they
Oh, wait. Rewind. Dragon Age technically didn't have a multiplayer component. You could log into the Dragon Age the EA website to download fucking
But that was
DLC.
you're right.
Yeah.
But that has something to do with them buying BioWare. Which I think BioWare was a big enough company where they're like, we're going to do it this way.
Well, I mean, BioWare worked with them for that and Mass Effect. Like, that's their signature. They like their
And I bet you Mass Effect 3, that was EA's influence. I don't think they would have done that.
the multiplayer aspect.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably the same reason why. Well, it was real popular, and they're doing the same thing with Dragon Age Inquisition. It just works better in Inquisition because it feels like it's an RPG, like online RPG. And I can see that.
Yeah. EA specifically said that, and I just think it's such a fun contrast to look at that. And Ubisoft's pretty much the same thing, even though, whatever. They might not have directly said it, but it's pretty clear when all their big games are multiplayer games. I love that contrast between then at the time, remember the PlayStation 1, N64-ish area, like, if a game was single player, it was almost better.
Yeah,
So, like, PlayStation 1 RPGs,
you could focus more.
the best PS1 RPGs were Asian. Easily.
Well, I mean, they weren't Western.
They pretty much weren't Western RPGs.
I mean, even obscure ones like Jade Cocoon was fucking Asian market.
Yeah.
That was
Completely
a fucking
Asian
game.
single player market to where you look at it today, and most of them are American, Westernish, I should say, Western RPGs.
Just games in general are more.
And I shouldn't say usually, but a lot of the time, they have a heavy multiplayer influence. Even if it's not a multiplayer game. Skyrim, even though it's not multiplayer, it's clearly meant to feel like you're in a world where other people are with you.
Yeah. I would say Assassin's Creed does and doesn't do that. Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, you can call assassins to help you out, right? For a fight.
Yeah.
Go to Assassin's Creed 3, and you have the competitive. Wait, no, that was Revelations. You have the competitive online. Hey, I can kill you, but whatever.
Yeah.
Not really true multiplayer. It felt like, honestly, it was fun for a little bit, but it was really just like after a while the fun kind of wore out and stuff. And then you go to the Assassin's Creed Unity that's coming out right now. That's the first Assassin's Creed with pop in and pop out multiplayer. Literally Assassin's Creed 4. How many Assassin's Creeds are there? There's like almost 10, I think, or there is 10.
Well, and that's a good point because you can almost see them shoehorning multiplayer in maybe where it doesn't need it or maybe where it does need it. Maybe in creative ways that we didn't think of before. One game I can think of, then you always bring up, which I agree with because it's a great game, was The Last of Us.
Mm-hmm.
They had a multiplayer component in there. Didn't need it.
Yeah. Just
I'm not going to
complement
say it's bad.
No, it's
but I'm going to
amazing.
say it didn't need it.
It didn't need it, but because I was going to get the game either way. But when
Mm-hmm.
they added the multiplayer, you beat the game, and then I beat the game before I played multiplayer. Then you start playing multiplayer, and it's a whole new world
Mm-hmm.
because you're going back. A good multiplayer is a game that captures the essence of the single player within it, or at least narratively speaking, it makes sense. In Last of Us, you're still playing as the hunters or the fireflies, and you're fighting each other. And the fear of not knowing where a target is, the fear of being snuck up on and shot or shanked, shivved, whatever, all that shit is still there. So when I beat the game, the fear of the clickers was gone. I was like, oh, fucking, I know what happens at the game. You go back and you play on multiplayer. Holy shit, human people are way worse than clickers. I still get scared if I get unexpectedly shivved because the way the game jerks the camera is so violently. You're just literally next thing you're sitting there. Next thing you know, the dude's cutscene is playing of him stabbing you, and it's like quick. It's not short. It's not long. It's not drawn out. It's not like it sneaks up behind you. It's not like assassinations in Halo Reach and Halo 4. It's dead, done, fucking moving on. It's scary as shit. I can assure you. And
So that's multiplayer actually being used as a tool to make the experience better, which is
yeah.
which is so high level intelligence of game design that I don't even understand it.
It's really difficult because if you look at Naughty Dog before then, when they did what's called 2 and 3, Uncharted 2 and 3, the multiplayer aspect of it didn't make sense. It was fun. 2 was more fun than 3, but it didn't make sense. Suddenly you're playing as Drake and you're killing, you're playing hero versus villains again, so that did make sense. But you're Drake and you're playing with a guy that died in the narrative.
Right.
And then it's like, oh, well, what the fuck's he doing here? You know? But whatever.
So that's the big picture for that generation. Now we're at the current generation. We got Xbox One, PS4, Wii U.
Co-op's dying.
Like, you mean same screen co-op?
I mean, same room co-op
Same room
is
co-op.
dying. The reason why I say that is one of the last titles of the last generation that I really loved, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. It's an amazing game.
That was a good game.
Yeah, you played it? You played it? Yeah.
It's a little arcade game.
Yeah, 16-bit fucking. You got your bit music by Amanaguchi. Great fucking. I have the soundtrack on my phone because of that, and played through the whole game. Loved it. It's a Saturday morning game, and what I mean by that is that's a game you could turn off your head or your brain and just play. It's like God Hand to me. It's a Saturday morning game. You just wake up, the sun is beaming through your living room, and you're just playing, man. You're just vibing, playing the game. Just that's what I love. So when it was noted that the game would not feature online multiplayer, a lot of people freaked out. I don't know if you know about that. People went nuts because they're like, seriously? And the reason why they said that is because they wanted to preserve the retro feel
Yeah, which is brilliant.
until they added online. They put online in, what, about a year ago, I think?
Really?
Yeah, it was weird. And or a little more than a year ago, they added an online component to it and allowed you to play with anyone else online. That's fine, but I really respected them up until that point for kind of standing their ground in that regard. Because nowadays, let's look at titles that aren't like indie titles. How many of them can you play on the screen at the same time? You have your Call of Duty, right? That's still split screen, right?
I don't even know. I've never played one. At least in more recent times.
I don't know if this one is split screen, but we'll just say it is. Killer Instinct.
Well, like fighting games, I'm sure could still be played.
Yeah, there's no way you have to play it. I mean, there are people, you can set it up to where you split it to where I see my screen, you see your screen. So like we're on character select and you only see your character.
Yeah. So sitting next to a person, and I think we kind of all saw this coming, but it's essentially gone.
That's the imagination part now. Imagine they're right next to you.
Yeah.
It all comes down to accessibility. Everyone's got their own lives. People can't sit down and play video games with you. They could sit down and play the video game, just not with you. So in order to tap into that audience, games are moving away from that split screen component. I mean, they save money. They don't add it in. Save time. They can cut a few milestones out of their total production.
And I feel bad that because there's so many multiplayer games, but we didn't touch on. Well, we probably missed a whole bunch of good ones. We didn't touch on Double Dragon, but those games are pretty much gone. Those don't exist anymore.
Well, they exist, but they exist to cater to the audience that wants them to exist. That's why we have
they're relics.
that the Heroes of Might and Magic side scroller that's out on PlayStation 3 right now. That just came out for free. That's one side scroller beat 'em up. What's it called? Scott Pilgrim. That's it, really. A lot of the game or Trine, but Trine's not really a beat 'em up.
Are you specifically looking?
Shit.
Sorry. Are you specifically looking for games that are on console that are
that you can play with each other
split screen?
that are not available in the arcade. So you can't like go to a PlayStation Network and pull them up because yeah, there's more there. But I'm talking about the ones that you pay your $60 for. Some games don't even ship with the multiplayer component though. I've seen that. One game of note, Wolfenstein. No multiplayer, no co-op, main
Yep.
story. $60. Fuck. I heard Shadow.
Most people
of
probably
Mordor-
wouldn't consider that worth it.
Yeah, but I heard it was a very well single player. I mean, if you put all your funds into it, I guess it is. But then again, so was Last of Us. They had a multiplayer. Bioshock Infinite didn't have a multiplayer until much later, and it was like a weird. Wait, did it have multiplayer? I could have sworn it had some weird, awkward multiplayer.
I don't recall one.
I don't either. Could be making that up.
Well, I think what the last, or what, I guess we could say last or current, we're kind of in both. What kind of really picked up, and we've talked about it before, but is the competition aspect of it is huge today.
Yeah, cooperative, not so much.
It's
there.
actual money
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, League of Legends.
League of Legends,
Dota.
the MOBA
Dota.
arena has exploded.
I will never play MOBAs.
I love them. Well, I'm not very good at them, but I love them.
Well, you can hit this subject.
You play 5 versus 5 or whatever it is the kids want to do, and it's kind of got RPG elements in it. It's got tactical, I should say RTS style elements in it, and two teams just kind of ram into each other and duke it out. Now, this kind of sprung from it sprung from World of Warcraft, or not World of Warcraft, Warcraft 3, and they created Defense of the Ancients. I think it was like Ice Frog or something like that. Did the original one? Something like that. And they made the original. It got crazy popular. This is kind of the same story as Counter-Strike. Somebody actually took the time out to actually make the game, and they made it as Han and League of Legends. Those two kind of battled it out. League of Legends pretty clearly won, and then they made Dota 2. And now those two are just going at it with millions and millions of dollars on the line. I wouldn't be surprised if this became the next, like, not within like the next couple of years, but within a decade or so. This could easily be a huge sports thing on the league of like baseball, any of that kind of stuff in the future. This could easily be as big as that. And I think with games becoming more mainstream, that's just a natural progression. And I don't know if I'm excited for it because I don't follow sports necessarily, like stats or players or anything like that. The same way I don't follow video games that way. So it's not necessarily for me a big boon, but I see a lot of people that really like know their players, know the stats, like who's next in the ranking and
Yeah.
who's doing all that.
Well, like any sport or anything competitive, it's really hard to actually predict who's going to win. A lot of times it's inconsistent.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at like Street Fighter or fighting in general, the FGC has had 3 different like championships. Very rarely does someone double up and make themselves a champion again for that same game the following year.
Right.
Just because there's so much competition, but there's so much random factor. You could lose to someone straight out of pools. You could lose to a random. You can miss your pool, which usually doesn't happen, but has. You can. There's a lot of shit that could happen that screws you up. And there really aren't too many people that win back-to-back tournaments. Maybe in a MOBA,
MOBAs, they do.
but not,
There's some consistency there, usually in South Korea.
not not in games like Street Fighter or even Marvel, which is even more fucking. I'll call it's broken. But a lot of games like that don't. Competitively speaking, the best thing about the competitions in a lot of communities is you don't know who's going to win all the time. That's why, like, I'm going to EVO again this year, and it's going to be my last year going, but I'm going to go. I have no idea who's going to win because the person who should have won the year before last won this one, lost the year before last one, and he had a better setup that time. He had to go through bunch of killers this time around, really good players, but really weird teams to win. And it's just, you can't predict that shit anymore. But people like that because it keeps them on their toes. No one wants to predict the end of a culmination of events or anything like that. So competitively speaking, it's just more fun that way. That's why, you know, people that win back to back in, like, say for instance the Super Bowl, it's there, it's just not as much. Teams don't always win back to backs or get, like, well, NBA you get three-peats, but
Patriots. Didn't they do a three-peat or four?
I think-
Out of 4 years, they won 3. I know almost nothing about sports, so don't hold me
I think it was
against
2
that.
years.
Hold me to it.
Chris Wayne is 2.
I thought they won 2, and then they lost 1, and then won another one, or it might have been the reverse. Like, I swear, I know almost nothing about sports.
Good for the
Yeah,
Patriots.
I think you should move on from the sports subject here.
But anyway, as far as the future of multiplayer goes, competition is just going to heat up. It's going to be more money. It's going to be more live streaming. Live streaming became huge. Twitch, all that kind of stuff became huge.
More live streaming on the MOBA side, on like the fighting game side, not too much because those are strategies or setups or skills that you want to hold on to use into a tournament setting. You don't want to use those. You don't want to show somebody
Gotcha.
unless you're willing to deal with the consequences, maybe in a tournament even, if it's against your character.
So that's the big part of that. What do you think as far as the normal people multiplayer, like the ones that aren't going to be in tournaments?
People like their fucking. You mean anything? Speaking like
Yeah,
cooperative
anything.
even? People like Super Mario Brothers on the Wii U.
I love it.
The reason why is because it's basic. It's no commitment. There's a lot of shit to do, and it's simple controls. That's why people like Mario, and that's why people prefer that competitive or that cooperative level, because there's a little bit of competitiveness in it. It's not that much. Same thing as Mario Kart, and that's Nintendo's thing. They've always had a little bit of competition with little competitiveness on their multiplayer games. That's what you look at Mario Party for. You break and destroy alliances. Super Smash Brothers, hey, same thing. If maybe you're playing free for all and you guys really want to get rid of a dude who has more lives than you, let's take him. You know,
Yeah.
a lot of that multiplayer aspect of things is leaving. It will no longer be with us. That ability to walk into the same room as someone else, hit start and press it, and jump into a game is leaving, like, completely. The whole fact that Halo was able to do that, to add that level of competition with co-op, where people are able to jump in, jump out of scenarios, was a big freaking deal. To be able to be like, hey, I want to play with. I think it was Halo 2 when they first did it. I don't think it was Halo where you could just hit start.
I don't recall.
Was it Halo 3? I don't know. Regardless, they did have it to where you could just be like, all right, hey, I want to jump in and I want to play with this guy. All right, cool. I'm hopping in. Psh, we're going to play the game. That's non-existent nowadays just because and if it does exist, it's drop-in online multiplayer. It's not drop-in local co-op. It's drop-in online. So if he's playing Destiny, if producer Eric's playing Destiny, oh, hey, I'm going to join his fire team and help him out. That's about as drop-in as it gets. Destiny doesn't even give you the option to go, you want to try, split screen? Even games like Borderlands had an awkward split screen, which was vertical, first of all, bullshit. And second of all, you couldn't play 4 people on one console.
Yeah, you can't ever do that anymore.
Yeah, it's becoming. I mean, you could do it with fighting games. Fighting games always do that. Tekken Tag 2. Hey, 4 people, let's get together. Street Fighter Cross Tekken. Let's get 4 people.
I have
Super
2
Smash Bros.
controllers nowadays so that I can charge one while I play with the other.
And that is the state that we're in.
Yep.
I'm still Justin.
And I'm Spencer.
And this is sad.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to bullshit. Because this shit's. I just got really sad when you said that, dude. I'm not gonna lie. That's really. What do you think from like making a video game like